Hey, Patrick.
Hey, Michael J.
Man, for this late in the format, Standard has gotten some surprises.
Yeah, I mean, depending on your perspective, some would find this surprising. Certainly, it's different than the previous weeks. I like to just see it as a, the metagame's time has come. It was always destined to go this way.
Well, that's true. And I'm not just talking about, like, adding a couple of risk factors to the main deck or your red deck, which is how the Team Open finished up in the hands of Freddie Crespo. I'm not even saying put 2 risk factors in your red deck and only 2 experimental frenzies. I mean, like, there's many different directions that Gruul decks have gone in the last, just in the last week.
Yeah, and in fact, I think it's not a zero to talk about Rakdos either, as far as all these different variations of red aggro. I mean, like the top 8 of the Standard Grand Prix in Kyoto it's 7 copies of red aggro or Sultai midrange, right? Like 3 Sultai midrange and then 4 red aggro. Most notably, the first place Gruul Aggro list being, definitely a little bit different of a take on the archetype than the third place Gruul Aggro deck, right?
Oh yeah, very, very different decks. And like just to start with the winner's deck, Daekyung Bae played. It's a Gruul Aggro deck with 24 lands, which is kind of necessary. Bae chose to play 3 Skargan Hellkites, which is of course like a 5 casting cost dragon, as well as 4 copies of Rekindling Phoenix. But then like no 1-drops, right? And then like all these kind of really advantage bearing 2-drops. So Bae played 4 copies of Growth Chamber Guardian and 3 copies of Direfleet Daredevil in the main. So, like, they were like pre-sideboarded for other red decks almost with those main deck Direfleet Daredevils, which, you can, play 1, get their shock, get their guy, and then you still got like a first striker on defense, which is actually not insignificant to get through when you're playing like small creatures.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about this style of Gruul a couple months ago, month and a half ago, but definitely the move to the main deck Direfleet Daredevil plan, as well as, instead of, if you'll recall, when we saw this archetype before, they were packing our preview card, your choice of Watch Wolf or 2/2 haste, but here, Direfleet Daredevil really seems like a pre-sideboard for when you want to be good against other red decks, and then like the blue aggro or white aggro.
Yep. I mean, and then there's like huge concessions here, right? So we've got the 4 unclaimed territory, and we've talked before that the unclaimed territory can name a variety of things. If you name Warrior, for example, it can cast both Growth Chamber Guardian and Goblin Chain Whirler.
Well, and in fact, in this deck, Warrior is the name in general.
Yeah, you can hit a Harpooner, but the other concession I think is really much more meaningful is 2 copies of Gruul Guildgate, which, I mean, they're clearly not unplayable, right? But this is not what the typical aggressive red deck wants on the first turn, and so Bae had to make some substantial kind of sacrifices and like no 1-drops, no spectacle cards, just really kind of middle of the road kind of cards and high power creatures at the top end.
One of the nice things about Gruul Guildgate is that it turns on Cindervines and Vivian Reed out of the sideboard, and Domri for that matter. When we saw this archetype before, there was a clear biasing where the green cards were basically all warriors or goblins, and that was back when they were using Siege Gang Commander instead of Skargan Hellkite up at the top. I really like that Bae's moved in a direction where you can just confidently name warrior in general. Like in your game ones, you just name warrior and it's the right call in most scenarios, unless you are like immediately in a spot of needing to play Skargan Hellkite or Rekindling Phoenix and you've got a very, very bizarre draw. But in general, you just name warrior and you're on your way. But the green sideboard cards were harder to get at because of only having 1 Forest, 4 Rootbound Crag, and 4 Stomping Ground for making actual green mana. And the use of 2 Gruul Gilgates here, the difference between 9 and 11, I think it's a big deal. It's a big difference.
Well, especially when you're playing cards like Status Statue. I mean, Status has got to be cast for G here, right? I don't think that this set can even naturally make a black, can it?
No, with no treasure maps and no green mana creatures, this deck is doing it the old-fashioned way.
So Status is insane in this deck. If you've got it on the Chain Whirler or if you've got it on the Skargan Hellkite, both of those are very exciting plays in my opinion. You get your guy, you give him Death Touch, they slaughter many, many opposing creatures.
Dude, you can Direfleet Daredevil, I guess, right? Like, there's got to be some kind of a spell you could play that could give you a black mana.
Well, I mean, the Direfleet Daredevil, I mean, you could just give him status and he's punching above weight at least, right?
Oh, yeah. But I think that once you give Skargan Hellkite status, all bets are off, right? Like, that's just, like,
all opposing creatures are off.
At least you get to kill 2 right out the gate, like just boom. But yeah, I think this is a pretty sweet evolution of the deck. It does steam, even with the 2 Gruul Gilgates, like the Vivian Reeds. That's definitely a little bit of a tight squeeze, but I could believe it. Like maybe you're just, I mean, I guess technically Domri Chaosbringer gives you an extra source of green.
Yeah. I mean, I really just kind of love the idea of some matchups where you just got like a Cindervines, a Domri, a Vivian Reed, just kind of like hanging back, gaining small advantages every turn, and the opponent's got a fistful of creature removal. Kind of love that idea, right? Like this deck can kind of just sit back in its chair, and Well,
I think that's something you were talking about. Definitely, and I think that was something you were talking about in Red Decks like 3 weeks ago about just how well positioned Cindervines is right now.
Oh yeah, fantastic,
and it's just worth making, like, why play mono red when you could like support Cindervines if nothing else?
Well, I mean, there's certain matchups like if you're playing against Wilderness Reclamation, kind of taking turns decks, you can like plausibly put them in a situation where they might just die, right? But yeah, and obviously it just helps a lot in tons of different spots where you're just getting a little bit of extra damage in, and then of course if you've got the open mana, which is not always the case, but one can dream, it is an outstanding answer to Wilderness Reclamation itself, or to some of these, enchantments that remove your permanents from the battlefield.
What do you think of the 2 main deck Collision Colossus along with 4 Crawl Harpooner? That's a lot more protection against flying than we've seen in the past, right?
Yeah, well, Crawl Harpooner is, obviously an awesome card, and it's great in a deck with so many creatures that can die. Collision Colossus, I think, I think it's fine to play in a deck that has red and green. The red deck that made the top 8 of the Mythic Championship in Cleveland only played it in the sideboard. But I think like Collision for, just casting it for red, it's like a pretty good card just for like knocking somebody's Angel out of the sky, somebody's Dragon out of the sky. And then I think Colossus is just like, it's a very good mana to damage conversion ratio, right? Like 2 mana, 4 damage. That's like modern playable. That's like a legacy luxury.
Well, yeah, it's not even just the fact that it's 4 extra damage. Sometimes you're getting more than the sum of the parts there, because like, for instance, when you can attack with all your creatures and then you win combat that they were going to eat one of your guys, but instead you win that battle and do some extra damage to their face. In particular with stuff like Goblin Chain Whirler and Direfleet Daredevil, right? Where you're first striking down whatever the threat is, it doesn't get to punch back, and then you also get to do some amount of face damage. So you're getting a little bit more than the sum of the parts in scenarios like that.
Yeah, those guys do in fact have some text, some combat text with first strike.
But as we mentioned earlier, there's a different style of Gruul midrange, also Gruul Aggro, Gruul midrange, whatever. This is a Rhythm of the Wild soft dinosaur tribal red-green monsters deck.
Yeah, I mean, this deck's actually got Llanowar Elves on turn 1 and Rhythm of the Wild potentially on turn 2. I honestly feel like the Rhythm of the Wild is a little light here. I'd love to see more copies of Rhythm of the Wild. There's only just one in Tokuyama's sideboard, but
two in the main.
Yeah, like that draw with Llanowar Elves is so powerful. And the thing is, it's not like Fires of Yavimaya. 2 Fires of Yavimaya were somewhat redundant, like diminishing returns. 2 Rhythm of the Wild are not, right? Like you get Riot twice, so you can give a creature haste and big, right? Or you can give them big. So it's actually, I think that just having 2 in play is perfectly great. I've done some light testing with Gruul decks and been very happy to, for example, have a Rhythm of the Wild in play and then use the mana from Domri to cast a creature and get multiple Riot triggers. This is awesome. If you're giving Galta haste, that's pretty fantastic. And then also, like, there's small things, right? Like if you just have Growth Chamber Guardian enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter, you get a fast trigger there. But the real big ups in this deck is if you can give Crawl Harpooner haste. Harpooner comes down, could have an enormous power based on its regular text box. But
it would frequently come down as 7/2 or an 8/2.
Then you give that thing haste. I mean, you're just boom. Out of nowhere, you could be striking for most of your opponent's life total. This is like
particularly if you Colossus, because like even if they have a chump blocker, you combine it with a Colossus, and you might just be hitting them for 10 with you had no board, and then you just spend 4 mana and 10 them.
Yeah, I think this is a really important aspect of this version of Gruul, which is like if the opponent has a Kaya's Wrath, for example, or some other kind of sweeper where they're killing tons of your creatures, they're tapped out, you've got nothing, but you've got the ability, because you've got Rhythm of the Wild or Domri in play, to play a guy, give it haste. In the case of Crawl Harpooner, they just filled your graveyard, right? So they just made the Harpooner big. You can just get them. You get them so nice.
Now, my question to you is, where do you want to make room for this Rhythm of the Wild number 3 or Rhythm of the Wild number 4? Remember, this is a deck that already has 9 3-drops, plus Growth Chamber Guardian being activated is not a trivial way to spend your 3rd turn. Would you be eyeing that Deathgorge Scavenger?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah. Deathgorge Scavenger I think is great, but I think I'd rather have it as a sideboard card. There is one in the sideboard of Tokuyama's deck as it is. How do you feel about Regisaur Alpha? Are you real excited to play that card?
I am, and here's why I like Regisaur Alpha. Not only do I like Regisaur Alpha here, I would not hate doing a little bit more to take advantage of it. You see, Regisaur Alpha gives Galta haste. If you put Regisaur Alpha down, for 5 mana, you already have 7 just by itself, right? So even if you had no other board, nothing else, when you untap, you already have enough mana for Galta. And that's to say nothing of the possibility that maybe you just had some other amount of board, right? Like you could easily just have in play a couple. You could have some threats in play already, and if you ended up at a spot where you had 7 mana, you might drop the Regisaur Alpha and Galta in the same turn. But I just think that the combination of, like, obviously Rhythm of the Wild is amazing with Galta, but the fact that you can do it with Regisaur Alpha also, but Regisaur Alpha is also such a great 5-cost threat if you specifically are in the, like, say you're one of those people who wants to play Siege Gang Commander, right? Where you're like, oh, I don't want it all in one basket. I don't want to play Skargan Hellkite here. I want to play something that, like, is good against removal. Well, Regisaur Alpha gives you 2 bodies, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I underrated the fact that with Rhythm of the Wild in play, Regisaur Alpha is like 8 haste, right? The primary body, which is a 4/4, can gain haste from Rhythm of the Wild, and then the other one already had haste, and you can give that one +1/+1.
That's a great combo too, definitely.
Oh no, sorry, it's non-token creature, so it's still 7, right?
But having the 5 extra damage or 4 extra damage from the Regisaur Alpha attacking itself immediately. But I just mean that having extra ways to get Galta down, you know, I think that's a big deal.
And Hasty Galta, like you said, is that's a really big deal, right? So, I mean, I guess it really depends on the kinds of interactions that you think are going to be in the format. But if you've got Rhythm of the Wild, right, to begin with, creatures you control can't be countered. So, like, if you're playing against Esper Control or Mono Blue, you know, who are defending themselves from creatures largely with cards like Absorb or Sinister Sabotage or, you know, Wizards Retort, they're not doing it there. So it's coming down. They might have an answer, but it's not going to be an answer until after they've already been splattered for 12.
Dude, you even got Domri for giving your Ghalta haste? Why is there only one Ghalta?
I don't know. I mean, like, I was actually thinking a second because they're like, oh, are we going to eye Deathgorge Scavenger? Deathgorge Scavenger is so good with haste, right? It comes down, gets a trigger, you can gain life or get big, and then, you know, when he attacks, and then it's like you get double trigger that turn. That's hot.
Yeah, I guess. But you don't, I mean, what are you going to cut? The Brontodons? I mean, you can only have so many threes, and I think I'm with you. I would play at least a third Rhythm of the Wild main deck.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. This is what happens when you play two colors. There's too many playables. Like, the red deck is just, like, scraping for playables. But now you've added all these filthy green cards. I mean, Growth Chamber Guardian is so good. Llanowar Elves is so good. All the cards we're talking about are just breaking these creatures are coming from the green splash.
And what do you think of the one Domri? As like, this is another, you know, that's the second list we've seen one Domri. I actually like one Domri as well.
You like Domri?
I really don't want the diminishing returns in this.
You like one Domri?
I like one Domri. I don't know that I like it as much as zero. I like it more than two. But I'd be interested in trying the one because I think that it adds a dimension to your deck, right? Like when you're playing against sweepers. And I wouldn't want to go too long on this when the competition is stuff like Rekindling Phoenix. But, you know, that said, I don't know. It seems fine to me.
I mean, the Domri is, I mean, if you stick the Domri, right, it's just in play and you get to untap with it, I mean, your opponent is in trouble, right?
Yeah, but that's going to be true with a lot of stuff, right? I mean,
yeah, but I mean, this deck is just, there's just 26 creatures, and most of them, if one of them's in your hand, Domri is going to mess them up, right? That's the thing. Like, if you're like your low end of your power scale is just hurling Growth Chamber Guardians at people, right, at a low amount of mana, and then just gaining a ton of card advantage while Domri's loyalty is going up. I mean, if you're combining this with creatures on the order of, you know, Ghalta, Rekindling Phoenix, Regisaur Alpha, like it's really, really problematic. The thing is that many decks have powerful threats, and some decks have haste, but for most decks, the powerful threats don't have haste. That's the thing, right? Like, you had a Lyra Dawnbringer. It didn't have haste, you know? Oh, you had a Gitu Lava Runner. It wasn't dangerous, right? Now we have a Venn diagram overlap that is going to, you know, be very problematic for people who did not anticipate this archetype, I think. Like, this seems like a hard archetype to fight against for me. Like, it might not be the most consistent deck. It might not be the most powerful deck, but just untapping with Rhythm of the Wild or Domri in play puts the opponent into a place that, like, people haven't been in that place in Standard in a long time, I think. So,
how do you think these two Gruul decks fare against the various Sultai decks, such as Yuya Watanabe with his finals reaching relatively standard take on Sultai? You know, no Planeswalkers besides Vivian Reed main deck, but he's just, you know, he's doing the Wild Growth Walker thing that everybody does, and he's all Hostage Taker, no Ravenous Chupacabra, which I like. But, you know, very, very, very little deviation from the from the path, I guess.
Well, Yuya's deck is so much stronger in terms of, like, kind of a progressive card advantage, or if you just let it be, it's gonna get you on card quality and cards in hand, right? Like, the interplay between Wild Growth Walker, Merfolk Branch Walker, and Jadelight Ranger, nobody has to talk about that. That's a thing we all know what it does. It's really powerful going long. You're going to add in cards like Hostage Taker and especially Hydroid Crassus, like if you don't beat this deck, it's just going to have so many more resources if it's just playing against an aggressive deck that, even just like playing guys and then just putting them in front of Vivian Reed while Vivian Reed ticks up until she gets to the -8 situation, which is basically unbeatable for one of these red-green decks. Like that's kind of the game plan here. But the problem is, especially I think if Tokoyama goes first, and I'm talking about the Rhythm of the Wild version that we're talking about, like first turn Llanowar Elves unchecked, and there's nothing that can check a Llanowar Elf on the first turn in this deck, in Watanabe's deck at all, right? He has 3 cast down. That's a turn 2 card. And then followed by the Rhythm of the Wild, like if you just have whatever you draw, right? Like whatever you draw out of the Gruul deck is just going to be sideways every single turn. And some of these cards are bearing substantial like built-in advantages, right? Like we talked already about Harpooner potentially getting bigger than it's supposed to be. Some guys might have hexproof naturally. Some guys might be huge and hasty. And like you just keep putting pressure onto the Sultai deck. And I think like its answers can be clunky. Like Vraska's Contempt is a powerful card, but it's a 4, right? Like a 4 is not necessarily a great kind of equaling casting cost against somebody who's got a huge guy sideways against you every turn.
All right, counterpoint. First of all, let's say Sultai wins the die roll. They, obviously your dream draw of Llanowar Elf into Rhythm of the Wild. Fun. Let's go with it. But what if Yuya plays a turn 2 Wild Growth Walker and then a turn 3 Jadelight Ranger?
Yeah, I agree. Play draw is huge here, and if Yuya goes first, I mean, he's going to get so many extra points. Because that Llanowar Elves into Rhythm of the Wild draw is so much less potent on the draw. I mean, it's still good, but it's way less potent.
And then with Yuya having access to Llanowar Elves as well, and that one Incubation Druid, it's not unreasonable for Vivian Reed to come down on turn 4, but even if it's turn 5, because obviously, you can count on it against a red deck, but like Vivian Reed destroying Rhythm of the Wild is not nothing.
That's fine.
Even if the counterattack comes back and kills Vivian Reed, soak up a little bit of damage and you got some answers to Rhythm of the Wild.
I mean, you could plausibly have Vivian Reed on turn 3, right? Like first turn Llanowar Elves, turn 2, anything. Like you'd be Llanowar Elves or the one Incubation Druid, just play Vivian on turn 3.
The fact that, I don't know, to me, the fact that the Rhythm of the Wild list doesn't have Goblin Chain Whirler, if I had to play against one of these two, I'd rather play against the Rhythm of the Wild list with Sultai. I know that when I was at the PT, I was finding that the combination of just the fast aggression of the style of Gruul that Bay is playing here, combined with things like Skargan Hellkite, and then some cheap removal just to buy time. I don't know. I was finding this recipe to be a little bit harder to face than the more green feeling list, the more green feeling Rhythm of the Wild list.
Well, I mean, obviously Bay defeated Yuya in the finals, right? So there's probably some credence to your thoughts there. I'm looking at Yuya's deck. It doesn't seem particularly vulnerable to Goblin Chain Whirler to me, right? He's got the Explore guys, which are sometimes vulnerable. He's got one Incubation.
But okay, so obviously, frequently Goblin Chain Whirler, known scourge of Llanowar Elves, right?
Absolutely.
And frequently going to get some extra money against Merfolk Branchwalker. Fine, right? But that's not even the issue. I'm saying 3/3 First Strike is surprisingly nightmarish for this list.
Yeah, just like battling it?
Yeah. Like, you can't fight it with the Jadelight Rangers or the Merfolk Branchwalkers or Hydroid Crassus, and Hostage Taker doesn't even line up right. And the looming threat of a Goblin Chain Whirler at any point makes it so that combat is a lot harder for you to just line everything up, right? Because you want to have your Wild Growth Walker win by 1 sometimes, and so on, right? And here's the big one. When you're playing Sultai, you lock up the game sometimes. if you're playing, and particularly if you brought out the Land of Elves and it's post-sideboard, but Sultai is a spot where status on a Chain Whirler is just like a 6-for-1 or a 6-for-2.
Oh, yeah. Because
you get into these stalls, you get into these situations where Wild Growth Walker is the thing that was keeping you alive and is like leading to a locked up board state. And then if a status comes down on a Chain Whirler and you just lose everything.
I mean, that's awesome, right? Like, I think that maybe that will become industry standard for even just red decks that are splashing green for Cindervines. Because, like, you know, even if they can only cast the status and not the other half, like, I don't know, that thing right there is attractive enough, I think, because Sultai / Golgari descended decks are like the bane of red decks in Standard. So it's
fast red decks.
Yeah.
And that's one of the advantages I really like of this style that Bay is playing is that I think fast red aggro just gets rolled by Wild Growth Walker decks. This bigger style, and it's a balancing act of how big can you be before you're too slow. But I think that this style that Bay is on is actually at a pretty nice spot for. It's not like you're going to blow them out or anything, but I think it's an efficient way to try to shore up traditional red weakness against Wild Growth Walker.
Yeah, I mean, how do you think this deck is matching up like against like an Esper player? Like, one of the things I like about the fast red decks is so good against control, but like this deck doesn't even have Banefire or Treasure Map in the sideboard.
No, this is a red deck for people who are willing to lose to Esper.
So
I agree.
It's like, let's throw some Warboss in and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean it's fine. You can also just play out your cards and be aggressive, right? Like, hopefully you don't draw your burn spells, right? But like, it's not a good situation. This is not a deck that actually wants to face Kaya's Wrath.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I mean, I'm so used to playing against Kaya's Wrath in Arena where, like, they Wrath, and then, like, that's my open. I stick an Experimental Frenzy, right? That's the turn that I get them, you know? There's just nothing like that here. There's not even Banefire, right? Like,
and it's not like Tokoyama where you can just have a surprise. Like, first of all, obviously, Rhythm of the Wild, right?
Oh, yeah.
Or Domri.
Rhythm of the Wild is like, that's the anti-Kaya's Wrath card.
And the fact that if you have ways to give Harpooner, so you haste, like the Rhythm and the Domri, having that reach out of nowhere, and then just obviously there's lots of little things like, for instance, Regis or Alpha is 2 threats. So following up a Kaya's Wrath with 2 threats, one of which has haste, it's frequently going to be better than just 1 threat against somebody who just has a lot of 1-for-1 removal.
Yep.
So I don't know. I think that the Bay's list definitely likely to have a weakness against Esper, but Esper hasn't exactly been doing that well. And in this particular tournament, the only control deck at the top, Jeskai instead of Esper. You know, and this is so Kensuke Kato playing a pretty classic Jeskai, a la Wafo from the previous format, with the pretty to be expected update of Absorb over Sinister Sabotage or Ionize. The most notable thing here, 2 main deck Spell Pierce.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's just complicated.
To go along with the 2 dive downs.
The dive downs, I think, right? Like, because this is like a 4 Niv Mizzet deck. I like this deck. I think it's pretty cool.
Wafo would roll over if he would be horrified to see 2 Chemist's Insight.
Yeah.
With no other high-end card drawing besides the 2 Expansion Explosion. Maybe you just can't do it. The format's just too fast.
I mean, but there's like Teferi is card drawing. Niv Mizzet is card drawing. Treasure Map is card drawing. Opt is kind of card drawing, right? Maybe there's stuff. It's not nothing.
Yep, and maybe you just got to be fast. I could believe it.
Yeah, I think like this is the control deck for people who want to have a plausible level of defense against creatures, right? Like that. Like this deck it lines up very, very nicely against most of the creature strategies as long as you get your colors.
Well, Ken, I've never liked this style. I didn't like Jeskai versus White Aggro, But I mean, as long as you think white aggro is not the dominant part, you see, I like this style against. I'm into it versus blue, but or even red. But like, I don't love it, but it's fine. But I actually don't like it against the white decks. I think Adanto Vanguard is such a nightmare.
Oh,
and I think playing 16 1-drops is so brutal for this deck.
I mean, this deck doesn't want to beat white. There's a sum total of 4 Deafening Clarions in the main, right? And then there's like he's not trying to beat white.
He's not even playing white sweepers.
Yeah, like you could play like Settle the Wreckage or something if you wanted to beat white. You could play, lots of. You could play more, the Fiery Candidate. You could play that. Like he's playing mostly spot removal, which is just gleefully bad against the white aggro decks.
And this actually looks like a pretty good call for this meta, just in terms of how much, like if you're trying to beat Sultai and slower red decks, well, this is a pretty good configuration for a Sultai slower red deck metagame.
I think if I really wanted to beat Sultai, I'd probably have some Star of Extinction. Like, what do you think? Like, this deck does not have great defense against,
I don't know,
against Carnage Tyrant.
But
like a really large Crassus going long.
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't think that's the issue, really. I mean, you should have something against Crassus, maybe a little bit more. Maybe it doesn't even matter that much, though. Like, at the end of the day, I think that the plan against Sultai is just all about Niv Mizzet. Expansion Explosion, really, too. But, like, you're trying to just slow the game down and take over that way. Gone are the days where it's all about this fight over Carnage Tyrant. I think you're going to get most of the mileage that you're looking for out of even just Deafening Clarion for buying time on the ground. Obviously, Carnage Tyrant will still be a nightmare if you have to face it, but it's just that card is so largely fallen out of favor.
Yeah, there was just one copy in the main deck of Watanabe's deck, and I think one in the sideboard. But it's not like back in the day where people were playing like 2 or 3 copies in the main deck and really aiming for the blue-white decks with it. Because I think like Carnage Tyrant is not good against Esper. Right, so as great as it is against Jeskai, it's just not great against Esper, and I think that's contributed to its downfall in popularity.
Well, it might, to be fair, I guess it is a little bit on the upswing. All 3 Sultai lists we see in the top 8 here each have the 1+1 recipe. The Gruul's success was not just limited to the Grand Prix. There was yet another take on Gruul over at the Team Open in the standard portion of Teresa Foe's Gruul list, 4th place list. This is similar to Goblin Chain War, Growth Chamber Guardian, Rekindling Phoenix, Gargan Hellkite, similar to Bay's winning list, but using Karn, Scion of Urza, 3 Gruul Guild Gates, and then also just like a little bit different of a mixture of burn and kind of walking back a little bit the whole main deck Harpooner thing.
Well, I think it's important to note. I mean, I know it's just a small change, but in addition to that 3rd Gruul Guild Gate, there's no forest in this deck, right? So literally every land in this deck can help to cast a Goblin Chain Whirler.
Yeah. Yep. And with 1 less unclaimed territory, too. I actually don't know if I even hate that. I kind of like only 3 unclaimed territory because I think the green sideboard cards are so important, but it's still surprising to me to not see the 1 forest. Maybe it just doesn't matter, and not enough people play Assassin's Trophy or something, but I would think that with Carnage Tyrant in your sideboard that the first forest has a little bit of mileage, something to consider.
Yeah, there's only one. But I'm just looking at this deck, or like any of these Gruul decks that we've been looking at. It seems to me that you could just put a little bit of effort in, and you would really, really shore up your ability to interact with blue-white and blue-black control decks, right? Like it's just not expensive to play like 2 Banefires and a little bit more Carnage Tyrant, I think, right? I mean, I don't know. I think that those cards are better against control than Domri is. And, Teresa is, clearly interested in playing a Domri or 2.
So one of the exciting decks, I think, from the Team Open was Chris Cronenberger's Merfolk list that he finished 12th with. His team finished 12th with. So this is just a blue-green Merfolk deck that's it's got 4 copies of Incubation and Congruity, 4 copies of Deep Root Water, and then just nothing but fish all the way down.
Yeah, this is very, very similar to Raph Levy's deck from the Mythic Championship, right?
Right. I'm wondering if you think that that this is actually a deck with some staying power, because Raph has been known to play some crazy stuff. Like, for instance, Oath of Nissa, the only way to cast your Planeswalker or whatever, right? But like, does this Merfolk deck actually have the legs to be a regular fixture in the metagame?
I don't think it's ever going to be like tier 1 in terms of its popularity, but it's cool. The cards are all good when they're played together. The deck obviously has 0 resistance to certain strategies, right? Like if somebody casts, a Deafening Clarion or a Chaos Wrath in game 1, it's probably going to resolve. So obviously you get some negates and disdainful strokes after sideboarding, but it's tough in game 1. The deck has huge vulnerabilities to cards like Niv Mizzet, right? There's almost no way for this deck to interact with the Niv Mizzet unless you get like a really, really ambitious Crawl Harpooner in a sideboarded game. And if Niv Mizzet resolves, we just saw that Jeskai list with 4 Niv Mizzets. It's going to completely take over the battlefield.
Yeah, Niv Mizzet's got a way of doing that, I guess. So we talked about the sort of 4 Hostage Taker, 4 Thief of Sanity deck a few weeks ago. Ashford Smith's take on it, 17th in the Team Open, it looks like went the way you were suggesting of leaning into disinformation campaign.
Yeah, I saw this list and I was just like, I think this is how I would go with the Dimir. First of all, creatures are awesome. I love 4 Thief of Sanity, 4 Hostage Taker. They're like, that's just what they were meant to do. Doom Whisperer was my favorite card in the set when it was first spoiled, and I've never actually ended up playing with it anywhere, but I like to see that together. But I really think like this disinformation campaign, Eldest Reborn kind of interplay.
3 Duress, 4 Thought Erasure also, notably, leading into just the attrition battle.
That's going to get you somewhere interesting. One of the things that I noticed in playing a lot of Standard recently is if you're playing a red deck, and we've seen a ton of these red decks, many of which have Goblin Chain Whirler in them, being successful recently, and then obviously the top of the Team Open was red deck against red deck in first and second place in Standard. Is all you have to do is somehow kill their Goblin Chain Whirler. Like, you can get it with a Thought Erasure, or you can kill it with a Cast Down. But what ends up happening is, as long as you stabilize, the Eldest Reborn is going to whittle their resources down. You resurrect their Goblin Chain Whirler, and then ba-bam! It not only is it like the 3/3 first strike that you were saying is hell on Sultai, but it could just kill all their 2/1s and 1/1s as well. It's just a little bit of an extra bonus there. Or you can Hostage Taker it and keep your guy alive. That's probably also good.
What did you think of Joe Burnell's mono blue list with 18 creatures in the main deck? This is obviously everybody plays Tempest Djinn, etc. But like 2 Surge Mare, 4 Merfolk Trickster.
Yeah, Surge Mare is like the big deviation here, right? Which is a 5 toughness creature with very little baseline power. I think that must be a concession to mono red. What do you think about that?
That's part of the equation, but my question is the theory here that maybe Surge Mare is just good?
Well, it has huge toughness, right? So if you're willing to play a little bit slow, right? So this deck does not have some of the 1 casting cost creatures that we've seen in the past. You're just like 1 drop, second land, Curious Obsession with a dive down or a Spell Pierce in my hand and see if we can do it. You can just play your Curious Obsession and all of a sudden you've got a 6 toughness creature on turn 3, possibly with like a dive down, negate, something in your hand that does what you need. And It just might get there.
Well, and what's more, if the Surge Mare hits them in that spot, first of all, you don't even need to pump it to be able to do the loot ability because the Curious Obsession's giving you that 1 point of stat.
Power. Yep, absolutely.
Right, so you get to draw 2, discard 1. But I'm wondering how often, and I'm betting it's not that high, but how often do you just dive down for more face damage? When you dive down your Curious Obsession Surge Mare, you can get them for 8.
I mean, that is fantacular. I love it. I would like to subscribe to your newsletter. I don't know what else to say. That seems awesome to me. I love like any of the times where your cards are already good, but then when you get an extra angle, you can win a game in spectacular fashion.
Dude, I'm wondering though, where are we going to get 9 mana?
You'll get it. You'll get it. Because you were like looting with the Surge Mare and the Curious Obsession, and
that's
you were opting and all that stuff. You were going to get it. And then after sideboard, you've got like 4 Surge Mare action. Yeah, no one can beat you. No one can beat the Surge Mare blue.
Then why don't we just start with the Surge Mares if that's really true?
I think that maybe this is the way that the deck is supposed to go. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, you're losing some unblockability, but you're gaining so much, right? You're gaining resistance to Goblin Chain Whirler. You're gaining resistance to Collision Colossus because, Surge Mare doesn't fly. I know that seems a little silly, but that's actually a thing that's happening when you make this change.
True. It is nice to Surge Mare people that are just sitting there with their Harpooner. Take it as a guy who had the Harpooner and my opponent was Surge Maring.
Yeah, I could totally see that, right? Like, it's the same thing we're saying about where the Gruul deck is just going to sit back on its Domri or Karn or Cindervines, and like you just keep accumulating this creature removal. Crawl Harpooner is a go-to sideboard card for many of these decks, right? The Sultai decks that weren't designed by you are playing 4 in the sideboard, right? Many of the Gruul decks are playing multiple in the main deck, right? They are there because people are gunning for the archetype of Reed Duke, the archetype of Auden Burchett. And when you're playing Surge Mare, which, unlike Tempest Djinn, unlike Siren Storm Tamer, unlike Terramander, almost every other creature in this deck is not vulnerable to that particular sideboard card, as well as Collision Colossus, which is a card they're all bringing in for the same reasons.
Or they're playing a bunch of main deck.
Yeah, absolutely. Right?
Robert Gress's second place list from the Classic had 4 main deck Collision Colossus in his Gruul Aggro. What do you think of Pelt Collector in Gruul? This is a little bit different of a breed, right? Like, this is definitely, it's still got the whole Growth Chamber Guardian, Spellbreaker, Rekindling Phoenix thing going, but like to see Legion Warboss, it's like, oh, okay, I guess he's playing Legion Warboss because he doesn't want to play Goblin Chain Whirler because he wants to be able to support Llanowar Elves. But what do you got, Pelt Collector? I mean,
Pelt Collector sometimes looks really good, right? I think that it's pretty inconsistent. A lot of the cards in this deck are going to trigger it. Sometimes you just have 2 Pelt Collectors in play. They're both 1/1, and you get swept by a Goblin Chain Whirler. That also happens all the time, right? So, it's. I think it's real good sometimes. I'm not sure. I don't have a strong positive opinion on it, and I've certainly lost to it and been completely overwhelmed by it as well.
So perhaps the most exotic take on Gruul Aggro of the weekend, Justin Stinger's 5th place list. This is the old Gruul Aggro with Rhythm of the Wild and Growth Chamber Guardian, Gruul Spellbreaker, Llanowar Elves, Skargan Hellkite. All seems like totally reasonable. But there's also
without a doubt my favorite deck of the week.
Dude, there's 2 of the Angel. Which Angel?
All
of them. 2 Angel of Grace, 2 Chalet Voice upon you, 2 Lyra Dawnbringer, 2 Aurelia Exemplar of Justice. Man, this is a deck.
All right, so I looked at this deck list. It was called Naya Angels. The first card I saw was Angel of Grace. Then I was just like, okay, I'm down. And then I saw Growth Chamber Guardian. That's not an angel. Gruul Spellbreaker. That's not an angel. Night of Autumn, 4 main deck, huh?
I like Night of Autumn, by the way. I think the card is sweet right now when you're destroying everybody else's Rhythm of the Wilds.
So here's the thing. I think that if I'm playing 24 land, Rhythm of the Wild, and I am the kind of guy who is investing in minimum 2 Lyra Dawnbringers and minimum 2 Angel of Grace, I don't think I play Skargan Hellkite anymore.
I was going to say, isn't 6 5s like an impressively ambitious amount?
There's just no way Skargan Hellkite is in my deck. Whether I have 2 more white 5s or I just lower my curve, the first thing I did was look and see if there were any status statues anywhere, which there are not. I just think Skargan Hellkite it's just it's too much. Like, I love Skargan Hellkite in a red deck, right? But at this point, we're like a Selesnya aggro deck with rhythm
splashing dragons.
Yeah, it's not a real thing. I mean, I really like this deck. I think that it's super cool, and it has so many good resistances, right? Like, a lot of the time you play a deck like this and you're just vulnerable to losing to something regular, right? Like, you could easily have built this deck in such a way that you would get annihilated by March of the Multitudes into Tristani Discordant. But, like, it's like, oh, I won't lose to that. I have Deafening Clarion and Settle the Wreckage in my sideboard. I was like, really? That's so cool.
Yeah,
I'm into it. I do think that this deck is... I mean, if you don't stick Rhythm of the Wild, you've got some serious problems with Jeskai and Esper. So I guess Rhythm Carnage Tyrant's pretty awesome. I think I would want some Banefires somewhere. Like, it's
you always want Banefire somewhere.
Yeah, because Banefire is the best. I love it. I mean, I guess you've got, like, Vivian Reed. There's a lot of cards that are good against them. But I want, like... I mean, this deck is willing to play Shalai, Lyra, Aurelia, Skargan Hellkite. Why can't we get a regular card in here? Right? Like, let's get some regular stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think you just show up playing Naya Dragon Angels if you're just, like, committed to the regular.
I mean, just no question, it's my favorite deck of the weekend. But a big question I do have, because we've seen this card over and over again in these lists. What do you think about Gruul Spellbreaker? We haven't really spent a lot of time on that card in particular, I don't think. And I'm really surprised at how popular this card is over Zertacoblin. Right? Like, it's just a little bit bigger and has, like,
I'm not.
A little more text. But it's 3. Like, 3 and 2 are just a mile away from each other from costing.
I mean, so trample is, like, a real thing. But second, when you're playing a Llanowar Elf deck, I mean, 3s are sweet.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, like, 4/4 trample on turn 2 is pretty good.
Like, I think that 4/4, in a world where so many people are playing lightning strikes at the expense of some number of lava coils, is like, that's already a big deal. You know?
I mean, speaking of the regular, there are 2 lava coils in the main deck and none in the sideboard here. Like, I think lava coil is just a nuts and bolts card that if I want to play them, I usually want to play all 4. Like, it's just too good. Like, it's great against Arclight Phoenixes. It's great against all the Drakes. It's great against, certain other Phoenixes. You're like, I don't know. Or, like, wouldn't you want some Justice Strikes? Like, it's not... I just want... I don't know. I want some regular. Like, I love the fancy, but I still want some regular.
I mean, I normally play more lava coils. I think lava coil is just a tiny little bit better than some of the other burn options. It's got places that it doesn't line up, but I think the places where it does line up, it's got first of all, it does the same job that you want most of them to do most of the time anyway. But then the fact that it's actually just so impactful against Rekindling Phoenix, I think, is a big deal. And then the fact that it does 4 is so important in a lot of these decks.
Yeah, what do you think about Rekindling Phoenix in this deck? I feel like I would rather have that than Skargan Hellkite. I mean, Rekindling Phoenix is just a great card. And I think if you were to line the 2 cards up next to each other, I think Rekindling Phoenix is a better card than Skargan Hellkite. Despite Skargan Hellkite having
Yeah, me too.
Differently high ceiling, right? Rekindling Phoenix is just nuts and bolts, hard guy to beat.
Yeah, I think, if Skargan Hellkite is an 8, Rekindling Phoenix is a 9.
Yeah, and it's cheaper.
Yeah, which this deck just has too many 5s anyway. Not even just that it's cheaper, it's just that you got room on the curve. So I don't know.
What do you think of, aside from 2 lava coils only, 1 collision and 1 fight with fire? Like, I feel like I've largely been extincting my fight with fire play with collisions. Yeah. So it's weird to me to play one of the other one.
Yeah, I think fight with fire is a little bit throwback here. Maybe it's good. Maybe it's the future. It'll come full circle, disco style. But I don't like fight with fire right now. I in particular don't like fight with fire in Rhythm of the Wild decks, because every time I try to build a Rhythm of the Wild deck, I end up with too many 3s. Like, look at this deck. You got Rhythm of the Wilds and Night of Autumns and Gruul Spellbreakers and Activate Your Growth Chamber Guardian. And despite all of this, we want to have a removal spell that costs 3? Yeah. I'd rather have the flexibility of a removal spell that costs 2, like more Lava Coils or Lightning Strike or Justice Strike or something, or another Collision Colossus, something.
Totally agree. What do you think about Trostani Discordant? That seems like a weirdo card to have in the sideboard. He's already got Lyra Dawnbringer.
Yeah, but it's for something different. So, admittedly, I think that having 2 Vivian Reeds and a Trostani in your sideboard in a deck that just has too many 5s in the first place, I'm not super into that. But if everything else was equal, like not counting the Glut at 5, I think Trostani is an underrated sideboard card. Obviously, people main deck it in their token decks, etc. But I think that in some matchups where the opponent, for instance, if you're playing against anybody that just doesn't have a ton of removal that's going to be locking up the board to some degree, Trostani is like surprisingly not that bad against a Sultai deck, right? Like they have 3 cast downs that don't kill Trostani, and then 2 Vraska's Contempts that are overworked anyway with all these other must-kill threats. And then it doesn't fly. So, like, I don't know. I think Trostani is an underrated sideboard card. That said, I think there's kind of a lot of 5s here.
Yeah, I don't love the Trostani. I think that, the only way I would just, am I just terrified of Entrancing Melody or something? That's where I see the Trostani, and it just doesn't seem good enough to me for that purpose. I think that, I'd rather have, even if you were just in the realm of 5s, I think I might rather have another Vivian. I might rather just have another Lyra.
No, but that's not what it's for. Vivian is not who you want when you're playing against Mono Blue or Sultai. It's fine, but all your other cards are there too. It's not like Vivian Reed's the perfect 5 for the job. I would board in Trostani against Mono Blue or Sultai.
All right.
But I don't know. That's assuming we do something about the enormous number of dragons and angels.
Well, how do you feel about Deafening Clarion against Sultai? It's pretty good, right?
No. Nope. Not into it.
No? I feel like I'd want to have, Deafening Clarion, Carnage Tyrant as my long game plan.
Against Sultai?
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
We just muck up the board and then get you, lifelink.
Okay, I guess. I don't know. I don't think it's going to be a race like that all that often. I think you're going to end up, you're going to want to keep the pressure on them. Yeah, I don't know. I think you got to have a plan for how you're going to win without being so reliant on flyers, because I think that as currently configured, this list is at real risk of getting tore apart by anybody with Vivian Reed.
Oh yeah, Vivian Reed, Crawl Harpooner, all really good against the top end of this.
Well, see, the Harpooner is solid, but it's not like the Harpooner's getting that kind of crazy money or whatever. At the end of the day, it's just another kill spell, right? Vivian Reed, on the other hand, will dismantle this deck. This deck has a little bit less haste than some of the other rule decks we've seen, and it's a little bit more vulnerable to just Vivian kill a flyer tick up and then literally be threatening to kill another flyer.
Well, on the other hand, this deck has got Rhythm of the Wild, so you could just hastily get in and beat up Vivian Reed.
Except Vivian Reed kills Rhythm of the Wild.
Man, you're ruining Justin's day.
I don't know, but Justin, I think, is going to make Brian Kibler's day when he sees this deck.
Oh, yeah.
If there's two things that Brian Kibler loves, it's a dragon and a Baneslayer Angel. This deck is, and it's Naya. This is a Brian Kibler deck if I've ever seen one.
All right, I think Brian Kibler. Well, no, Brian would cut the Rhythm of the Wilds, right? Like, that's the first thing he would do. He was famous for not playing fires.
Mm-hmm. Although I think in this format, I think he'd keep him in, but who knows?
I mean, it seems pretty good to me with these Crawl Harpooners, and I mean the idea of having like either a 6/6 Lyra Dawnbringer against someone foolish enough to have Fight with Fire like Justin himself, or just like a hasty Lyra Dawnbringer is that's too good. It's too good because like also it's hard to exaggerate how much cover the Rhythm of the Wilds give you against control. Right, like you just X out a big chunk of their defense and X out a big chunk of their other defense.
So I know we were covering Standard today, but just as a sort of aside, there is one Modern deck that I always have my eye peeled for Restore Balance, and Brandon Zognoski, top 16, the team opened with a Restore Balance deck. It's the latest in a long line of As Foretold Electro Dominance decks. This time, instead of stuff like Living End or whatever he's playing, 4 Ancestral Vision, 4 Restore Balance, and Restore Balance is obviously super duper sweet with these 4 Greater Gargadons, and then whether you have this Chandra, Jace, or Karn, if you keep a Planeswalker and you Restore Balance, you've got the game kind of locked up right there.
Oh, yeah. I think that's like a really underexplored aspect of the Modern format. It's exactly what you're saying, right? Like balance is not very balanced when we're talking about having a Planeswalker in play. The other thing is Greater Gargadon also doesn't count, right? Like it's when it's in the suspended area. So
same with Ancestral Vision.
Yeah. You can use these cards to generate a tremendous advantage with balance, and the opponent doesn't have very much that they can do about it other than to somehow just counter the Restore Balance, which obviously only a minority of decks can even do. So, some stuff is just nitpicky, but, like, what do you think about, like, the Relic, the Tormod's Crypt main deck? I mean, that's just permanence that you have?
I don't mind the Relic, but I don't like the Tormod's Crypt.
Yeah, but whether you, like, mind it or not, like, the Tormod's Crypt is at least a Teleria West target. I don't get the Relic.
The Relic?
It's just a permanent, right? Like it's a permanent that you have that you can imbalance the Restore Balance, but I'm not sure.
Well, it ducks you under. You have the advantage, right?
Yeah. No, it gets a part out of your hand, and it's not counted on the battlefield.
Well, it's also very much what you need if you play against, like, Arclight Phoenix or Dredge or somebody who doesn't need their mana, because one of the big advantages of this deck is that you're going to Restore Balance away people's with your Greater Gargadon all their land. So if you're playing against somebody who actually can win through that, it's kind of nice to be able to get rid of their graveyard, because those people tend to like, people who can win even if their land gets destroyed, they tend to use the graveyard.
Yeah, well, those are terrible people. I think that we can all agree. But when you take all their resources away at the same time, that's good times.
I guess the one Tormod's Crypt's fine if you're going to play 3 Teleria Wests. I'm into it. This is a dope deck. I like the 3 Remands and 1 Echoing Truth. I don't know about the 2 Abrades. That's a little surprising to me.
Yeah, my eye went there too.
Yeah, I'd have to see, I guess. I don't know. It's a little different. But I think this deck is dope. I'm excited to see the continued evolution of these things, and I think we've only scratched the surface of all the nonsense that's going to go along with Electro Dominance and As Foretold.
I actually like a lot of Brandon's sideboard cards, right? Like, I mean, there's like a nice play here. Like, Shattering Spree is great. You don't see that in a blue-white deck very often.
Cascade Bluff powered up.
Yeah, but the other one that I think is really sweet at a 2 of is Rending Volley. When was the last time I saw... Rending Volley anywhere. I don't remember. I think I played Rending Volley in a standard Pro Tour once, but I think that was it. Like I don't think I've ever seen. I mean, I don't know if I've ever played it other than that.
Here's part of the reason I think Rending Valley is brilliant. All these decks have Crackling Drakes and Thing in the Ices.
Ooh, very nice.
Like, it's so exact. Like, that's actually really dope.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's kind of exciting. And it can't be countered. Take that.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yep.
Yeah.
Plus, one man has a great amount of mana to spend.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
It's the second best amount of mana to spend.
I'm thinking, like, is this something that a red deck might want to adopt? Probably not, right? Like,
you have to be reactive.
Well, the other thing is this doesn't actually kill a core Firewalker, so, like, even though it kills white creatures, I think it's just a little not right for the format for that kind of strategy.
For a Lava Spike deck, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's something that more people should be considering in, like, say, I don't know, maybe if you're playing, like, some kind of a Scape Shift deck or something. You know what I mean? Like, something where you actually are looking for a reactive card and you're a little bit slower of a deck. And it is unfortunate the way it lines up against core Firewalker, so it's obviously not for that spot. But there's going to be some spots for it, and I think it's just kind of a oft-forgotten, pretty niche but pretty dope sideboard card.
It's an instant. It's very good. I think that maybe aficionados of the Snapcaster Mage might want to play this card. Seems like
worth considering.
Very, very nice pairing with Snapcaster Mage.
The only tough part is that it's a little redundant with Path of Exile.
Well,
so it's better if you're not already a person who's playing Path to Exile. All right, dude. Excited for Standard continuing to evolve after all this time. It's going to be interesting to see what this weekend in Boston brings for super duper heavy. In the $255 billion 6-person invitational tournament. And if this past weekend's Standard events are any indication, it should be a real exciting event.
Yeah, I agree. Can't wait to see what happens.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play Dredge, so jail or hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis state. Lost a lot of friends, got left behind. Had to